So today's talk is the retelling test, getting the most for beta readers. And it's a little bit long, so I've divided up into two parts. Today we're going to have motivating issues. And you can subtitle this talk, Don't Pay People to Comment on Your Work. And I'm going to spend the rest of the lesson today defending that proposition. After that, we will move on and discuss another way to get feedback, which we call retelling. So the story starts with Adam wandering through Nordstrom. And I was in the cosmetics section, basically doing circles. And I noticed something. On one kiosk was, I believe, Khloe Kardashian, Crystal Jenner. I don't know what their names are. But each little kiosk had a little face of a celebrity. And the one I liked the most is Selena Gomez. So I put her up here. And I was thinking about a contrast, and that would be Michael Jordan. So you have Selena Gomez on the left, and she's selling, I'm going to call it lipstick. I know I got that wrong. And Michael Jordan is selling shoes. And it got me thinking, right? There is definitely a parallel between what they are doing and what we are doing. And I'm sure you're familiar with this word, at least most of you, which is parasocial. You have a relationship with these people, and yet you don't know them and they don't know you. You've never met them, etc. And what's interesting here is how it affects purchasing, right? Consumer behavior. And that is part of the reason you're buying their products is that you know them, you know who they are, and by buying them, you get an affinity for them. And at the same time, if the product doesn't work the way it's advertised, I don't know, you end up with horrible blotches with your makeup or you hurt your feet, you're going to blame them. Now, it's a little bit unrealistic. Let's say that at the outset, right? There's no way that buying some lipstick is going to turn you into a supermodel, or wearing Air Jordans will allow you to play for the Bulls. And yet, this is a real phenomenon. These so-called, I'm going to call them lifestyle brands, on average do way better than similar competitors. So there's money to be made there. And yet there's also this pitfall, right? You're staking your personal reputation on the product. And I think you should begin to see the similarities with being an author. Of course, we have to deal with an objection, right? The first objection is going to be novels are not lipstick, nor are they shoes. So let's think about that a second. And the point of reference I want to make is to fine dining. I know it's not as popular as it used to be in general, and perhaps especially among starving artists, but picture a fine dining establishment, right? You're sitting at a big table, tablecloth, napkins of all things, silverware, water glass, whatever, etc. What else is going on at that same time? You have a staff that is dedicated to serving you. So the convenient cultural reference is the bear, right? I forgot what the guy's name, but what was that guy's name, the waiter? I know he played the guy in Fantastic Four. All right, it escapes me.
It's Ricky.
Richie? Richie, exactly. Right, he's waiting there, welcoming the customers. He or the staff is at their beck and call. They need a water glass refilled. They need suggestions on the dessert. Everything is there to support their dining experience. Now contrast that with these brands we're talking about and being an author. It's roughly the same user experience. It's this weird combination between an intense intimacy and total isolation. No matter how many YouTube videos you watch or read instructions, that lipstick and that basketball shoe aren't going to do enough for you. And it's the same thing with a novel, right? Just like you can't expect Selena Gomez or Michael Jordan to teach you how to use the lipstick or the shoes, you can't expect the author to be there for the reader as they are reading. So unlike the waiter who's hovering over your shoulder, ensuring you have a fine dining experience, authors can't do that for their readers. So what do they do as a substitute? Well, it's product testing. These brands millions, if not billions of dollars testing their products to ensure what? That the user experience is not perfect, but at least won't lead to complaints, right? And if they're doing their job right, they're going to ensure that the user enjoys the experience as much as possible within the allotted frame. So they spend a lot of money on product testing, both to mitigate against failures on the one hand, and to ensure that the product performs well enough, right, not perfectly, to give the consumer a good experience. And we want to apply that to novels, right? This is an argument about how you should test your novels to make sure when they get into the hands of the reader, they're going to have a good experience. And remember the key aspect of this. You are selling the novel to them, and they're going to read it in isolation. So we want to do as much as we can to ensure that that experience is enjoyable, smooth, etc. We're going to talk about some more specifics about that in a minute and next time. But for now, I want to talk about what you shouldn't do, right? What is not going to help you deliver that kind of product experience. And the title of this is Paid Editor Gotchas. So the common practice when getting feedback, and remember, I'm drawing a direct analogy between feedback and product testing, is we ask people for comments. Right? You find a writer friend or a reader friend, you say, hey, you hand them an entire novel and you say, what do you think of my work? Make comments. And the epitome of this is a paid editor, right? Oftentimes, people seek them out. However they find them, I won't discuss, but you hand over anywhere between $1,000 to $3,000. I've seen someone pay, I think the highest I heard was $6,500. They get the whole novel and they return comments, 30 or so pages worth of notes. Now, I've been very interested in this, and I've asked our members and other people I've talked to in relation to our contest to just let me see the notes. And most of my comments are derived from that experience. Now, the one thing that happens most saliently is people hand the comments and they say, what am I supposed to do with these? Right. So remember, they've paid oodles of money for 30 or so pages of comments. And the question is, for them, what's the next step? And 9 times out of 10, my answer is the same thing. Well, let's go back to Bardsy's tools, right? We're going to use the MCS and we're going to try to decide which of these comments is the most relevant, which one you should give priority to, and then we're going to go through however many pages there are, 15 to 30, and we're going to try to figure out what you should do first. So far, so good? Maybe, maybe not, right? To me, it's incumbent on the paid editor to prioritize the comments. Some do. But at some point, there's going to be a threshold of comments you have to handle first and the rest. So the idea is you want to take your manuscript and address the ones you should handle first. Then what? Well, can you go ahead and address the comments that should be handled next? Probably not, right? It's very likely that if the editor has done a good job and identified major problems and you've addressed, say, the top, 1 to 5 comments, it's going to be a different novel, right? The manuscript is going to require another developmental edit. And then you have to negotiate with them. Most of the ones I've heard about want a new fee, right? They're not in the business of iterating through novels. They're in the business of one and done. You know, they might give you sort of a consultation, but by and large, new project, right? So another way of looking at this is once you get the comments from them, you're essentially on your own. And then arguably, the author is left to start over. Now, you'll see I have a whole different way of producing and revising novels. It's based on iteration, and we'll get to that next time. The second thing that I don't think people pay attention to is what we can call evaluator bias. Now, the most salient thing about a paid editor is that they are not a real reader. We also, your colleagues here in the Bardsy Elite group, are also not real readers. What we are is proxies for real readers. And the question is how well are we doing our job of protecting the reader's interest, of ensuring the novel is satisfying and meets all the prerequisites for a good reading experience? And I want to point out two particular things that suggest that paid editors are not going to do a good job at evaluating your work. The first is they have to finish, right? Remember, if you look at our other blogs and videos, you'll see that a major problem authors face is DNF, right? Did not finish. And this is the one thing that paid editors can never test, right? They are committed to finishing the novel. Now, maybe they might say this gets to a point here where it's so bad, a reader is likely not to finish. Now, with an iterative process, you would stop right there, go back and try to figure out what went wrong. With this process, I don't know, unless they give you a refund, likely or not, they're going to continue, right? And in the worst case, you can imagine, well, the reader probably would have given up here, the reader might have given up here, the reader might have given up here. Not very useful feedback. Everything after that first point of where they suspect a reader would have given up is wasted by definition. The second problem is a bit more subtle, right? And I used to grade either supervised grading or grade hundreds of tests in the undergraduate courses I taught. Here's the thing. You give someone an A or a B or a C, you always have to justify the grade. In this case, it's worse because they're literally paying you for comments. So there's a mandate to say something. And the question I would ask, especially in light of point 4, is whether what they are saying is purely genuine or it is in part a product of the fact that this is the way they earn money. Now, what I would like to see is I pay $2,000 to a paid editor and I get a piece of paper back saying, great job, this is ready to publish. That's the extreme case. So either, I don't know if anyone's ever seen that. If you do, please let me know, right? Even that sort of hypothetical is not backed up with a promise. This is ready to publish, and I'm offering you a contract. That's what we would like to see, right? But even then, we would still like to see that if a novel is indeed ready to publish, that the paid editor will say that, right? They should be free to say that, and I strongly doubt that anyone has ever done that. So the flip side of that is that you're paying for all these comments, maybe in part to sort of fulfill some kind of length requirement, right? If I don't give this person 15 or 20 pages worth of comments, they're not going to feel like their $2,000 investment was worth the money. Both of those and other things that we don't have time to talk about today are going to lead to evaluation bias. This third problem, I think, is a little more subtle. It's competing vision, right? Remember, our theory at Bardsy is that you're the auteur, right? The author is responsible for their story. And the only help we can give along that dimension is to develop your story. So the tool we'll be talking about later, the continuity and value delivery spreadsheet, is one aspect of that, right? Most paid editors, and I'll go so far as to say this includes publishing editors, but that's a special case. We're going to talk about that in a second. Are authors themselves, right? And so what happens is their idea of a great novel is competing on two levels with what you might be doing to try to tell your story. First off, they might try to change your story. So I talked to someone last week and I looked at the comments the paid editor gave, and one of them that she was very upset about was drop the romance. Now, of course, it took 3 or 4 paragraphs to explain why she should drop the romance, but her what she said to me was, I want this to be a romance, right? So the person she paid advised her to change the story. Literally in this case. I'm not saying every editor is going to do that. This is, sort of an obvious, I'm going to call it a malpractice, right, for lack of a better word. She wanted to write a romance. The editor's job is to help her write that romance effectively. It is not to tell her to drop the romance. So in some sense, she got gypped. At a deeper level, the problem is one of what makes for an ideal story. Right? An editor, by virtue of the fact they're giving comments, is claiming that they can make the story better. In other words, they are pushing the story closer to some ideal, one that is going to satisfy readers. And what you have to ask is, where are these comments coming from? In other words, what is that editor's version of an ideal story? Now, as you know, if you've looked at our publishability index at Bardsy, we put a lot of effort into trying to figure out what an ideal story is. And we have laid out that criteria in detail, right? And used it to judge our contest, to lead our writing groups, and as the basis for all the content we're putting out. Ask a paid editor the same question. What do you think an ideal story is? And see what they say, right? The worst kind of editor is going to say something like either A, I'll know it when I see it, right? Or B, I don't think there is such a thing as an ideal story. Every story is unique. And we talked about that a bit before, and we'll come back to it next week. But that philosophy, that statement doesn't hold up. Right? There are ways of judging stories despite the fact that everyone is unique. So, quick tip. Before you engage a paid editor, ask them what the ideal story looks like. Now, a cheap cop-out is to try to point to a comparable, hopefully in your genre, and say, I want it to be like this, right? That'll get you some ways, but it won't get you too far because, obviously, you don't want to copy that ideal story. There is one caveat. What's the caveat? The only time I would advise listening to an editor is if your novel is under contract, right? They have given you money and are asking you for changes. Unless they are super objectionable or ill-advised, go with it, right? There is room for discussion with most traditional presses, right? Why? Or are you sure this is going to work, right? But not, no, I'm not going to do that. That is a huge mistake, right? Don't let your ego get in the way of your professional success. If you are asked for changes by someone who has bought your work, listen to them. Okay. The last point here is number 4. When you work with a paid editor, every single one I've seen deals with whole novels at a time. Now, this is sort of a reflection of the other 3 points, but there's 2 things in particular that you lose when dealing with a whole novel. The first is cognitive overload. A famous finding from psychology, cognitive science, is that humans can only do one thing at a time, right? You can either chew gum or drive. If you try to drive and chew gum at the same time, what happens is your mind switches modes. right? I'm driving, now I'm chewing gum. I'm driving, I'm chewing gum. It happens so fast that we don't notice. But when it comes to a long task, like commenting on an entire novel, those mode switches interfere with the kind of things that we want our feedback to provide. Right? Specifically, we want to know what's working and what isn't. Now, it turns out that if something is really working, chances are the editor is going to be so absorbed that they're going to forget to make comments. So instead, they'll just make a giant circle and say, this section is working fine. And they probably won't be diving any deeper. And the second issue that occurs is orientation, right? Chapter breaks are critically important for reader satisfaction. They have to be in the right place. And most importantly, in this instance, they have to reestablish the continuity and the empathic relationship the reader has with the main character at the beginning of the next chapter. So today, for example, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about orientation, making sure the reader and the main character are on the same page. Now notice in a fine dining establishment, the waiter is aware of that, right? I just served the main course. Now it's time for dessert. You have to ensure that the reader has the same kind of support at the beginning of every chapter. I've never seen a paid editor comment on chapter orientation, most likely because they're reading a whole novel, right? They don't need orientation. First of all, they're paid to pay attention. And second of all, they probably don't even pay attention to chapter breaks. I don't know if they do or they don't. But, you know, on some, these four things suggest that this is not the right way to do it. I'm going to sum them up in 2 points. Let's try this. The first thing is that feedback should be naturalistic in that it should resemble readers as closely as possible. You want to catch readers in the midst of a casual reading experience. For the second point, you want spontaneous feedback. So, naturalistic, spontaneous. And the method we've developed is one that's used in psychology and persuasion studies. It's called retelling. And next time I'm going to talk about that method. But I just wanted to bring up one more point before we move on. Oops. All feedback can be divided into 2 categories. I talked about this last time, but it's kind of mind-blowing and it directly affects how you're going to gather feedback. So it's important in this context. 1, either your story needs work, right? It's underdeveloped, particular elements, or there's a bad fit between elements, or the transmission is ineffective. Somehow what you're saying in this particular chapter isn't aligning in the story. A matter of sequence, you should have said this before you said that. A matter of emphasis, an important point is lost because you spent too much time on something else. Or, when we just talked about, the novel isn't broken up into chapters effectively, you're losing orientation or continuity. And if that's true, strongly believe it is, and you can follow the argument in our blogs and online, you should direct your feedback, your naturalistic, spontaneous feedback at transmission, at assessing whether or not your writing is effective. And more specifically, identifying what's working and identifying what's preventing reader satisfaction. The former, story needs work, should be taken care of elsewhere, right? The responsibility for developing your story lies outside of the immediate feedback process. Quick digression. There's only 2 cases where reading an entire novel is warranted. The first case is emotional, right? I don't have any confidence in my novel. Can you read it and give me a thumbs up? You might need that, right? Turn to a fellow writer, ask them for a thumbs up. And then if they don't give you an enthusiastic thumbs up, go back and use the retelling method to get more specific feedback. The other instance we can think of is if you want to predict an Amazon review, right? So you have a beta or an ARC reader, read the novel and write an Amazon review. That's a useful exercise, but not in terms of getting actionable feedback on your writing. And we'll talk about that again another time. So the last question is, if I can't use feedback to work on my story, what should I do? And the answer is Bardsy's tools. So a quick plug for our Essential Tools course. It is starting on Saturday. You can see retelling is just number 4. It is sandwiched in between 6 other tools. And those are the tools that we use to develop our story and then make sure we're writing effectively.
Bardsy delivers the tools, guidance, and support you need to produce compelling novels. Our well-researched and thoroughly tested approach includes our minimum complete story, a 90-second exercise that keeps your writing on track while fueling creativity. Bardsy Publishability Index, a 23-dimension checklist that offers attainable goals and provides actionable feedback. And our brand new comprehensive character developer that helps you construct unforgettable characters. Come see for yourself at Bardsy.com today. Try a workshop or enter our first chapter contest. Then, when you're ready, Elite Membership delivers writing groups, personal coaching, and a curated community. With Bardsy, your work will captivate everyone, from agents to publishers, and, most importantly, your readers.